And I have been looking forward to this discussion for quite some time. I learned about Jane Wolfe Francis because she is really a pioneer in the movement to help families better communicate with each other and find appropriate caregiving solutions for our parents. And she's the author of the book, Parenting Our Parents, but that's sort of scratching the surface on what she offers the community. So I'm real excited on this Valentine's Day to welcome Jane Wolfe Francis to the stage. And we can talk about this broad and confusing topic of parenting our parents. And I think, Jane, when we were planning this, you specifically chose Valentine's Day and the subhead that we see there on the screen, transforming the challenge into a journey of love, which I think is really fitting. And I know we're going to dive into that, but let's get to know you first. Tell us a little bit about your background and what led to your current career path.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this wonderful platform with so many interested and perhaps needy people. Pioneer, that's quite a term I'll have to add to my resume. I actually never wanted to be a pioneer. I came to California in my late 20s, and I had grown up an only child in New York City. And by my mid 40s, I had been a lawyer and a law professor and did a lot of really interesting work. And I started in poverty law and discovered later in life there's a lot of relationship between senior and disabled needs and those of the poorer community. Sometimes they overlap. Anyway, I decided in my early 40s that all the arguing that I was doing wasn't using the best of me. And I went to social work school to become a therapist. And given my age, I thought I should specialize in geriatric care. And so I did. And I was sort of jaunty-jollying along in my life, starting my career now in private practice in geriatric care. And because of all the things I was doing here in California, I would go back occasionally, but I would keep in close contact with my mom and dad, who were living in the home that I grew up in New York City. Now, there's a little difference when we're talking about this era that I was with them and the current era, because there really wasn't Zoom and FaceTime and ways to see what was going on in your parents' home, which I recommend doing for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's really more fun to talk to people you love and see them face to face, even people you don't love. It's very useful if you're not able, as I was 3,000 miles away, not able to sort of check up and see how they were doing. So I'm going back there one Christmas vacation from my work, and I go to have dinner with these people who I thought were my parents. They show up at this restaurant, and I'm just astonished. My mother walks very slowly, frailly. My father's kind of holding on to her. I kiss her. She's freezing cold, but not just cold because it was Christmas in New York, just cold inside. She really wasn't herself. She let him talk for her, order for her. She really didn't speak much. And I had just been on the phone with him like Tuesday, and this is Friday. So I'm just completely flummoxed. Figure, well, maybe she's got something going on, isn't feeling well. So I let that go, although I have a very restless night. And the next day, I call and my dad says, well, why don't you go to the museum? Museum? I mean, a lot of good museums in New York. I didn't go to New York to go to the museum, but I thought I'd honor what he had to say. And the next day, it was more of that. And he said, don't come over. Don't come over. Your parents ever tell you don't come over when you've just come 3,000 miles to see them? No. So what did I do? Came over. And he looks at me at the front door and he says, what are you doing here? I told you not to come. But you got to notice something really wrong. And I walked into a house with 2 people with pneumonia, which is part of why she was so out of it. You know, layers of dust. This was the perfect time they figured to fire their longtime housekeeper when they really needed somebody to shop for them and cook for them and clean their house. And the sheets were gray. Their bodies were not good. And all of a sudden, I realized I had been duped.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have any siblings, out of curiosity?
No, I'm an only child, still am. Although along the way, as I say in my book, my closest cousin and I, also an only child, adopted each other. So we would have siblings as we aged. But no, there was no one there, and it was thousands of miles away. And there was an immediate need to get a whole lot of people in place. And what I did, you know, being the lawyer and therapist I was to try and find some books, some magazines, something, internet. And unlike what you find with parenting children, there was nothing that was helpful. And I'm going to say this, there's not a lot that's helpful now, which is what led me to write a book I didn't want to write because 2 reasons. That generation, my generation of parents, very private. I don't tell the other people what's going on. I think this generation of seniors, my generation, boomers, we're kind of more open about things. Excuse me. But my parents were very private, and I was concerned to let their privacy out. And also, therapists really don't tell their life stories to people. Mm-hmm. And once it's out there forever. Anybody I've ever met or would meet or any future person. But I just felt I had to do something. And so I started writing this book. And then, Steve, I wrote it 3 times because I didn't want to put it out. And I was fortunate that both of my parents were alive. My mom was pretty far into her Alzheimer's, but I thought I should share a little bit about that with her, because one of the themes I like to share with people is no matter how old they are, they're still our parents. Mm-hmm. They still care about us, and they still want to know good things are happening with us. And there is a lot of what people call role reversal as we help share in their decision making and tasks. But it's really important to me that we don't condescend in that way, that we give them the honor and the dignity.
And I think that the title of the book and your and some of the other things that you do that we're going to learn about, the coaching, support group, what have you, parenting our parents is a great term, but it's very important. Like you just said, these are adults, and it's a different parenting role. Correct?
It's very different.
Yeah.
And the requirements of the task, the nature of what you're dealing with, which is this part of the cycle as opposed to this part of the cycle, the coming down as opposed to the going up. But it is a cycle, and there are needed skills and qualities when we parent our children, similarly to parenting our parents. One of my favorite skills, I'll just share here with your audience, is the take a breath, take 2 breaths, and respond rather than react to what's going on. It just really helps. Those breaths, they say if you breathe out twice as long as you inhale, you help excrete the toxins I like to say, you know, the stale carbon dioxide and also some of our stale thoughts.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think more that that it gives you time to survey the situation and understand it, and especially if we've got loved ones with dementia, because it's really easy to react because you think you're talking to mom and dad that you grew up with and raised you for many, many years. But as you've illustrated in visiting their apartment, this is a radically different couple here. But understanding why they're behaving this way and the fact that this is it's cognitive impairment, I mean, and getting in their space. You've referenced your book, and one of the things that I love to do with authors and our audience is give folks a glimpse at the book that we're referring to. So, and I'll share this link with everybody direct on Amazon. But here we got I guess this is a family photo here of your family.
It is. My parents are kind of, how do you say it? The bald man in the middle with the glasses. That's my dad. And to our left is my mom.
Okay, great.
And the cute girl sitting down in the middle there. That's an early picture of a pioneer.
Oh, there we go. That she's so cute.
And to my left, our left on the picture is the man who became my brother in our 50s, Rick Moss. And to my right is Dick Wolf, people know from Law and Order.
Holy cow. I had no idea, but yeah, I'm very familiar with, wow. So Dick Wolf is your adopted brother?
No, Rick Moss, the other cousin. Actually,
Okay.
a bunch of cousins, but the one to the right on the screen in the tie is Dick Wolf. And he wrote no on the bottom next to me. Yeah.
Oh, right there. Okay.
Yeah, we were contemporaries. I think he's about 6 months older. And he's my first cousin. And we have the various Wolf family members there and their spouses at a childhood picture. Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Out of curiosity, was Dick Wolf, did he go into a career as a lawyer and then transfer to the producer?
No, he was only a writer.
Oh,
and
okay.
that is our family profession. My dad was a songwriter. He wrote with Frank Sinatra and others, Burt Bacharach. And my grandmother was a writer in the over 100 years ago.
Oh, wow.
The Jewish Daily Forward. She wrote a column. She was a very left-wing radical person who worked with Emma Goldman. And she had a political column when no one really cared what women thought about anything. But she was out there writing a column every week. And so we have a lot of writers in our family. Rick Moss also.
You got a lot of pioneers too. So, all right. Well, I got the table of contents up here, and you've given us a little glimpse at why you wrote the book. But as folks can see, really, you really touch on a lot of interesting and important topics. When we're talking about our parents' well-being and helping them make decisions. Any sort of thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience on kind of navigating the book, or insights on any of the chapters that we see here?
One of the things that was intriguing to me when the book came out was how many of of my senior patients wanted the book, and they wanted like 3 copies for each of their kids. Um, and so this is not just oriented toward people who are what I call pop parents, who are as contrasted with senior parents. And the reason that I think the seniors are so interested is because they want to know about their own aging, but they also want to know how to navigate it from their end. It's really important that this not be, we're going to go take over because we're smarter than they are.
Well, and I think if we could rewind the clock in your own personal journey, which I've heard similar stories over the last 30 years on a weekly basis, but if we could have rewound the clock and your parents were introduced to this book at some point, and they had the reality of, hey, if we don't talk to Jane, we potentially could be a burden on her, or we are not going to be in charge of our decision making. So yeah, I definitely see two or three groups of readers. I also want to remind everybody.
It wasn't a straight go, by the way. Mm-hmm. One example in the book is we decided to move out of our house, which was one flat surface with several bedrooms and bathrooms and a good configuration for them and maybe a caregiver who might live there or stay over some nights, and went to buy another house so they could have that house. And my mother announced not coming. 2.5 years it took for us all to be convinced when the doctor called and said, your mom cannot stay in this house and your father cannot take care of her by himself, even with, caregivers all the time. So these things are not an easy go, and the journey of love is really very complicated. But yes, I think my parents would have enjoyed the opportunity. They were kind enough to have had a book like this. They were kind enough to set up things legally and financially, primarily because they were that kind of people.
Their daughter was a lawyer.
And also they got a little help from the, yes.
Well,
one of the questions I pose in the book for people to ask is, how old are my parents acting today? Because this is not, as I say, a one directional thing. So, there are times late in the afternoon when we're sundowning, which is a time when seniors get a little less oriented as to who and where they are.
Well, I would say individuals that have cognitive impairment, not older adults.
Not all seniors, although I too get a little tired in the afternoon.
No.
Those sundown, they may, be acting 5 or 6 years old and not confused and all of that. That's not somebody you'd leave alone in the house. Whereas earlier in the day, even with someone with some cognitive decline who's acting around 14, you might go to the store, pick up a sandwich and come back. So those of us who are involved in the process need to watch. And that's really the first key. Start watching. And as I was saying, technically, we can do that a lot easier. We have cameras now, but cameras in the home like nanny cams for seniors. Mm-hmm. Your mom gets up every morning at 7:30 and makes coffee. Doesn't go off one morning, you call because you have a camera there. Is one way. So people begin to observe in different ways. If you're there for a visit, open the refrigerator door, see what's in there. Mm-hmm. Open the medicine chest, see what they're taking, how often.
Yeah.
Start watching.
I want to remind our audience that, feel free to share your stories or present your challenges. We can use those as talking points on this topic of caring and loving our family members. But I also want to dive into some of the other things that you do, Jane. Here is Jane's website, and which is parentingourparents.org. And I'll drop that into chat here. But tell us a little bit about some of the things that I see on here. It says the Parenting Our Parents community, family coaching, you've got a blog, and then you've got a link to buy the book.
We also have a really well designed and well-equipped resource page for people. What I discovered is it's 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm scratching my head what to do. And before there was a book, I really would have liked to have been able to talk to somebody else who was up at 3 o'clock in the morning scratching their head as to what to do. So I put a community together. And in the community, which is of course free, we have resources. We have a blog that I write about a bunch of things that are coming up in the community that are in time going on. We have a forum where people can talk to each other, ask questions of each other. And then I discovered that I needed really, for some people, and I do want to say about the community, that it's premised on the idea that our fellow seniors and our fellow pop parents are all teachers and learners, as frankly am I still. And there's much we can learn from each other. It's not just the professionals in the arena who we can turn to. And your program provides many, many professionals in a variety of ways that people can turn to. And you keep the programs up so people can come back as they can to this one and share that with other people. But, you know, the maintaining that point of view of being an innocent and able to learn, I think is helpful at any age in our life, particularly when we're going through such a challenging time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of community and speaking of us all being together to help solve problems, Vivian poses a great one. And this is one I know you hear and I hear it on a weekly basis, is can Jane discuss the challenges of when adult siblings are not in agreement of the status of the parent and what's needed to keep them safe and happy and healthy. Now, on one hand, Jane, you had it, you'd probably argue with this. It's sort of being, you know, the only child of your mom and dad is that nobody's here with me to help me. You know, I'm in it all on my own. But when I hear the stories from the siblings like Vivian's talking about, that really does present some challenges. Any sort of thoughts or solutions on this? And folks in the discussion, feel free to jump in as well with your ideas that might help Vivian or any other folks that are wrestling with, how do I get my brother and sister, how do we get on the same page?
I'm so glad Vivian raised that question. It is one of the most challenging for the majority of people who have siblings. And as you say, you know, as the only child, it was lonely, but there wasn't anybody really to criticize me or say, no, you're wrong, except my parents. But how do you navigate the sibling situation? Well, there's several levels that question is appropriately coming in on. One is the recognition of the stage that they need some help. And that's sometimes a question in geography, that the people who are close by go over and see mom and dad for Sunday dinner. They have an ongoing basis. although it's sometimes people who come in from the West Coast who don't go to Sunday dinner go, my God, what's happening with mom? Because if you're there all the time, sometimes you've kind of acclimatized yourself to it. But in addition to recognizing and agreeing, I think that it's easier now than it was in my era because of the technology of phones and cameras and Zoom. I recommend, for example, that pop parents, at least one, go to all medical meetings and have the phone with them. Go to medical meetings, because in my experience, some senior might say to me, oh, I exercise every day. And their daughter will say, well, mom, it's kind of like Monday and Thursday, really, isn't it? And so for better histories and information with physicians and therapists and lawyers, very helpful. But also for the siblings not there on the phone, to be in the session, to listen, to know in advance. Mom and I are going to see Dr. Solomon on Friday. Can you be there? It's 9 a.m. I'll have the phone on. This is what we're going to discuss. If you have questions in advance for me, so that the siblings become informed about what's going on from the outside, as well as from what they can see with cameras and Zoom and other things. But how you actually get people who may have sibling rivalries and sibling differences from age 1 on out to agree on these things, that is one of the biggest problems. And it's partly why I created a coaching program.
Well, I was going to say that that one thing that I like to reiterate when we talk about this topic is you don't need to walk the road alone. And let me refer back to Jane's website here, where you can see that there is that she offers a solution for family coaching, which I think is wonderful. It's very specific and focused in this area. I also want to make sure, if you're not aware of aging life care managers, this is another way to get support that can also end up leading to assistance down the road for decision making. And if you go to the Aging Life Care Association website, aginglifecare.org, and you click on find an aging life care expert, you can find them in just about every state. But let's go back to your family coaching. Tell us a little bit about what's involved with that, Jane, and what are some of the techniques that you use there that might help a family that's in turmoil.
Yes, there are, as I started to say, Steve, there's a number of factors that I, as an only child, only have a window into. But like you, I keep finding over and over and over again that the sibling challenges are often a barrier to getting the parents the help they need, and to remembering that after the parents are gone, the siblings will be left with each other, and that if it's really possible to get on the same page, it just becomes so much more of a journey of love. And so I'm a very big disliker of worrying. I'm a very big liker of planning. So I help create with people in a coaching program a POP plan. And I try to get as many people on the team as are relevant. Could be the spouse's children, even. It could be the the siblings' spouses, the siblings' children, a neighbor, people who are involved in your parents' care in their everyday life could be part of a team to do something. Somebody could help get groceries for your mom, and she could make the chicken soup that everybody loves and get some for the neighbor as well. In many, many ways. But the the essence of coaching is to try to get people a plan. And it's not like therapy where you meet every week. It's on an as needed basis. Generally, if the senior parents are available, they may well be part of this coaching. So they help make the decisions and when and where and how and why. If they're longer into the cognitive decline, or one of them is, they may or may not be appropriate to attend this. But the sooner we get people talking, and the sooner we get them looking and watching out, and starting to pay attention to programs like yours, websites and books. So I would suggest if siblings are having a challenge, share the book with them and see what I went through. Now, again, it's not going to be a sibling thing.
No.
But the stages of it are parallel in people's lives,
And some great feedback and advice from some of the folks in the audience. Dixie always has some great insight. And one of her things is get parents to document their wishes in detail. And she says siblings need to get over it. And I know what you're saying there, Dixie. And oftentimes if a sibling says that to another sibling, it's an explosion ensues. But really, this is, and I like how you titled this discussion today, Jane, is transforming the challenge into a journey of love. And one of the best things to really love is to have empathy. And I think that we need to be empathetic of our siblings and their perspective and vice versa, that can often help. Let me go to another question that came in, because
I'd like to add that I love the idea of our parents having wish lists of all kinds of how they'd like to age, how they'd like to be cared for, care for each other, and sometimes funeral arrangements. Some people even have pre-death parties that are the things that you can't go to when you're dead. So how when we're alive?
Nicole shares, well, here, I'm going to share these two resources that came from our audience or community members here. And one is the 5 Wishes document.
Yes.
The 5 Wishes document, and that's 5wishes.org. This is a great tool that can help you. And Nicole shared Death Over Dinner, but that website didn't come up. So let me just do a real quick, because I tell you what, if this organization exists, I want to get them on our discussion. And Death Over Dinner, I hope it loads up here for us. And but while that's loading up, Death Over Dinner, let's have a talk about Death Over Dinner. I'm going to reach out and see if we can't get these folks on a discussion. Okay. Yep. I got a question here. It's like, you may not be able to fully answer this, but my single 80-year-old dad has stated he's leaving his apartment fee first. And also, no one will ever live in this house with me. I won't spend money on that. I think you've heard this, Jane. I've heard this, and probably countless people who are listening to us have heard this. He's doing okay so far, but we know he'll need support with cooking, bathing, home care within the next few years. I keep hearing about more underground networks of caregivers and nurses that are less expensive, but I'm a total loss to where to start looking. Wow. Lots of things to unpack there in that statement. You want to give it a shot with some words of wisdom, Jane?
Going out feet first, huh?
Well, I think the biggest thing here is resistance to.
Yes, no, I got the power that he wants to exert. And I guess I would address the loneliness. Isolation and loneliness are really causing premature death.
I totally agree. And I'm an advocate of aging in place and staying in one's home.
Yes.
But when we do that to our own health and safety and loneliness and isolation, because I'm got to stay here and I'm not going anywhere, it can be very toxic to an individual. But it can also be very difficult as loved ones to observe this going on and figuring out when and how we can reach out to somebody.
So I would encourage that listener to perhaps look to some of the friends of her father and see if it's kind of like play dates if we're thinking about children and parenting children. But, hey, George, couldn't you go over and see Dad? Bring over a pizza, watch a ball game with him. And, just begin to think about what would be a little less isolating. I also think it's very, very important to get seniors, if we can, physically out of the home. And I know it's colder back in some parts than us lucky Californians here, but really getting out of the house, just a little fresh air, walking down the block, it clears out the head. And sometimes when we're by ourselves, as this listener's father, you just get so into your brain thoughts over and over again. It's like a treadmill of the mind, which doesn't go anywhere. So if you can go over, get him out of the house, walk to a park, maybe he has some hobby, maybe a bike, maybe even a bike that doesn't move, but things that begin to look like less lonely. And there are classes, so many classes now, even exercise classes. I have friends who are taking exercise classes with people across the country that they love. So they get to see them as they're stretching. So I would encourage people to be a little bit out of the box in thinking about how to address that issue of loneliness.
Yeah, and Jane, I loved your suggestion of using the family. I mean, his dad's networks of friends and companions, maybe former coworkers. We did a discussion that I'm going to drop into chat on helping older adults and caregivers build their networks they need for successful aging. And that discussion might give you some ideas here on ways that you might implement this. Now, the other thing that you referenced is this underground network of caregivers. So there's hiring a caregiver from an agency or an organization. There's also hiring a caregiver that operates privately but has proper screening and insurance. And then there's what we might refer to as an underground network, is folks that you can get for less money, but they might not have proper screening and insurance. And just be cautious when doing that. But I think everybody in the audience will say there has been some very successful caregivers that have been hired that aren't really caregivers, and dad embraces having them come in. For example, a college kid, might be somebody that could get in there to help dad, and he doesn't realize that he's being helped because the college kid is studying what he did as a profession or something like that.
They could even play chess together.
Yes, and gather some things. Arlene references. Sorry, adult daycare. I just wanted to reference that Arlene references adult daycare is a great way, especially if somebody has cognitive impairment, to get them outside, get them engaged, make them less lonely and isolated. I cut you off, Jane.
think I might have forgotten, but
okay. Well, here, this might trigger this. Mamela says, I have one. Mother
I
wants
do
to.
remember.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead, read her comment. Please.
Okay, it says mother wants to leave only with the son because she said that it is the son's obligation to care for her after the death of the husband. She does not accept anyone in her home. He has to be totally devoted to her. Boy, I tell you, I mean, it's I've heard similar stories as well, and it's I think if we reflect back on a lot of this, is that a lot of these situations we're coming in and it becomes a crisis because mom and dad have not had open dialogue with the families, and if they have had open dialogue, it may have not been productive back then, and so now it can't be productive now. And just imagine the stress that son is going through, and especially if he doesn't live locally. I mean, mom wants son to be totally devoted, but she's in California and he's in New York, and it's sort of these are challenges.
I think there's another level of challenge that we haven't quite discussed yet, which is cultural. And there may be cultures in which those expectations are not out of the ordinary. In some of our Asian cultures, there is such joy in the wisdom of the aging family members that it is a joy to be allowed to take care of them. Mm-hmm. And yet it carries with it also some additional responsibilities of attention. So that's part of how someone who's a coach, for example, can help by understanding and explaining some of those cultural challenges within the family, and also from people who may not be in the family, a doctor who may not understand about that, or someone like that. So I also wanted to mention to your audience, if there are people who are listening who have been caring for their aging parents, still are, or maybe their parents, like mine, have moved on, I offer the opportunity to certify individuals to become coaches, to become certified POP family coaches, where they can go and do what I do and other of my certified coaches do, which is to get into this kind of situation where the family sits down and discusses, is that the son's responsibility? Can he manage it? Can the son who's far away, who's a banker, take care of the money and financial ends, whereas the daughter who's closer by could help with marketing and making sure that the foods that are being bought are healthy, and unload the foods when you get from the market to the car to the house, and do that schlepping of stuff for the parent. Different people in different circumstances can be part of the team in different ways. And it's remarkable how by being part of the team with a plan, how much easier it is for everybody involved. Now, POP plans are going to need alterations maybe when somebody really does need to leave the home. And how do you convince a parent to do that? That's a very challenging thing to do. And sometimes we need outsiders, like in my case, both the caregiver who was the major one and my mom's doctor who called me and said, they can't live in that apartment in New York by themselves anymore, Jane. So that's, when people are telling you that.
Now, out of curiosity, in your family situation, yes, did they and quite frankly, we're planning a discussion in a few months on urban on living in urban environments as we grow older. I think New York City is one of the best places that somebody could, or Chicago, or any of the large cities are wonderful places for older adults because you don't need to drive. You've got culture, you've got all ages, there. Now, somebody who's lived in a suburban environment their whole life, probably very difficult to make a transition like that if it's not something they're interested in. But out of curiosity, did your parents end up leaving their apartment, or did they stay there for their life?
No, I had to bring them here to California.
So they ended up moving to California. Okay.
After the I'm not coming and the 2.5 more years of caregivers at home and the phone calls from the doctor and the caregiver, it was, I'm sorry, honey, I don't care that you don't want to come.
Yeah.
It's just time. And so I brought them to California, and originally I put them in a senior living and had some additional caregiving. And then my mother took a fall, and she could no longer be in that level of care. She needed nursing care. And my father kind of wanted a break, as he was not aging cognitively in the way she was. And so he ended up in more of an assisted living place. They spent the rest of their lives separately, but I brought them together to see each other.
Man, well, this is a common path that people live. It's also one of the things for folks out there. This is a great example of where life plan communities and continuing care communities can be so valuable to couples, married older adults, because on the same campus, you could have the memory care, the independent, the assisted. Nicole says, oh, sorry. Yep.
It's a little hard. Sometimes I don't mean to interrupt you. The sooner, if it really looks like this is going to happen, the sooner that you can get them into a place where they can still develop friends and have a life and enjoy the good taste of food and, do the kinds of things, but in a more communal setting, then they're really, even though my parents didn't like the idea of it, when I actually moved them here and they had to go down and eat dinner with other people in a room and sit at a table and talk to them, it began to be fun. My mother started taking yoga in a chair. And
which is something that she wasn't doing when she was living with your father alone in the apartment. And
something she had done as a young woman.
That's
not
great.
In a chair, but
yeah.
But I really recommend looking ahead, and these communities that allow you to age in the same community, but with more and more care, that can be very, very helpful, because then again, you're not displacing people. So when you move them from their home, it's very disorienting.
Okay. And got a few comments that I missed. I apologize, folks. Okay. So let's see here. My mom, Arlene says, my mom currently lives with me in Northern Virginia. I'm including my siblings who live in Kentucky and Florida. I agree with Jane that we're lucky that we have Zoom and FaceTime. Yeah, utilizing technology. And actually our discussion tomorrow is on technology just designed for this, to help keep caregivers and family members in the loop. Dixie says, care managers can serve as a neutral party and highlight the parents' wishes, not necessarily the children's wishes. Arlene asks, is there a medical situation where you can possibly have the doctor become involved? And then later she also, or Nicole references that they couldn't convince mom to move and ended up having to go through conservatorship. And wow, she ended up having to go to a psych ward. So lots of things there. Patricia said,
let
go
me
ahead.
suggest that um, I don't know every state, but here in California specifically, I know that doctors are authorized to take car keys away by means of the driver's license. And that's becomes very challenging for people who want to live on their own, perhaps who aren't living in cities where they have good public transportation, the suburban families and others. It's very hard because senior parents feel like you're going to take over their life and they're not going to be able to go anywhere. So figuring out with them where they go to the market. Well, I'll go with you and we'll get the good foods and I'll help you bring the groceries in, or I'll take you to the doctor. I'm going anyway. You don't really, but the doctor themselves has a right at a certain stage of frailty and cognitive decline to tell the DMV this person cannot drive, and that sometimes makes it easier.
Yeah.
And of course, there may be the necessity for some kind of legal intervention.
Nicole says, my mom was in Los Angeles. They took the car keys and she ordered new ones from a locksmith. And I think the other thing that we also have to remember, folks, is that unlike parenting our children, these are adults, okay? That, and it's probably one of the hardest things is drawing that line in the sand at hey, look, okay, I did everything I possibly could. It's not like this person is 13, they're 85. They've made mistakes in their life. It's horrible to see somebody make mistakes at that stage that we're observing, but sometimes you just have to do everything you can do and just let it go.
Well, what we don't want to do is infantilize our parents. We want always to treat them with respect and to try and figure out how it is that we can bring some joy into the room. I think that particularly people who are visiting parents in facilities, I recommend that people bring music with you that your parents like. Bring YouTube with some comedy show they used to laugh at. Come in and tell them the things that are going on in your life when they're not able to speak anymore. But what we really want to do is also fight our own ageism. I know that's a big thing for you as well as for me, Steve. And there's a wonderful study that says fighting ageism can have you live 8 years longer. If you don't buy into all of this stuff about I'm too old, I can't walk around the block. Well, walk outside 5 steps. Keep on going. See what you can do. And when you walk that first 5 steps, you build some confidence. Well, let's try 10, Mom. Okay. How about this? We put on that great beanie you like. You look fun in it. Try and make things fun. Keep it a journey of love.
Well, and I just glanced at the clock and we're going to wrap up here, but I'm glad you brought up ageism because I want to put another commercial out for the discussion that we have on Friday. I can't wait for this one. It's ageist birthday cards. They're not clever. They're harmful. And but what you're talking about, there's so many different types of ageism, and oftentimes older adults are the ones committing the most flagrant elements of ageism. It's sort of like, I can't do that, I'm too old. Listen, yeah, going skateboarding, that's something that you might be able to utilize that statement, but getting outside and exercising or doing some things that are purposeful and productive, and not disparaging their own selves through ageist statements. Okay, let me jump in here because Paula, whenever I say we're about to wrap up, another great question comes in. And this says, Paula says, a conversation I had with my mother many years ago haunts me. She was caring for her parents and they disagreed about something. I advised mom that she needs to let them live their own life, that they were responsible for themselves. Yes. And Paula, I think that's one thing that we all have to be aware of. And we beat ourselves up. In fact, I'm haunted by a discussion that I had a few months ago. I'll see if I can find it, of a caregiver going through this process, and she was drinking. Like, it was so challenging and stressful. Instead of turning to yoga and other productive exercises, she turned to dysfunctional behavior and was drinking too much. And we all have to draw that line in the sand and be responsible and healthy, and help our parents be safe and responsible too.
Yes, there's so many stories of family caregivers who predeceased the person they were caring for. It's so very important for ourselves to figure out what's healthy, to create respite, to have breaks, to acknowledge what we're doing, to get additional help professionally from lawyers, financial accountants, tax people, therapists. There's a lot of help out there in a whole variety of ways that hasn't been there before. And I'm so glad that you have this program and keep on moving with all these important topics. So I kind of wrap up by saying, pay attention. Keep on looking, asking. Don't intrude, but kind of check out your parents so that you don't have the shock and backstroking that I had to do, trying to figure out what to do with two sick people in a filthy apartment who weren't taking care of themselves and had no help coming in. All of that I had to change very quickly, but if I'd had a plot plan, it wouldn't have been that hard. So pay attention, decide if you need to care for your parents, you, your siblings, when, how. Enroll a team. Try very hard with your siblings not to generate, mom loved you more, no wonder you get to take her to the whatevers. That's just not very helpful. Kind of want to be on our most mature side if we can, but getting the help we need, caregivers, care managers, to make the practical, legal, financial, and spiritual decisions. And it is a spiritual journey, this aging thing. Mm-hmm. My dad, who chose to be in hospice as the end of his life, he got great spiritual help from the people who came in and cared for him, not only to ease his pain, but to ease some of the fears of dying. So take advantage of the help. And I hope the book and website and coaching program that I've created will help you as well.
And I dropped all that into chat. I'll also have it by the recording. And I think let's wrap up today with a statement from Joan Green, who says, thanks for the presentation. It sure is tricky sometimes to let our parents make decisions and live their best life when we think that some of their choices may put their health at risk. Thanks, Joan, and thanks everybody who participated in today's discussion. But most biggest Valentine's Day hug and thank you to Jane Wolfe Francis for the resources that you shared and leading us through what I think is a really good discussion. We've got to dive into this this topic more frequently.
Happy Valentine's Day, all of you out there, viewers,
You
listeners.
too. We'll see you at the next one, folks. Thanks.